Yeah, so when I first started to work at Distilled, one of the first tasks that I was assigned was to try and win featured snippets for one of our clients. I was completely new to SEO, so I really thought that this was going to be my chance to prove myself. I spent tons of hours researching blog posts, everything that was out there on featured snippets, and I was convinced that this was going to be a great solution. My manager thought that he had just given me a simple featured snippets task, but really what he had given me was a quest that was later going to become my talk at SearchLeeds and lead to me being the featured snippet master at Distilled. That's not really what happened, and today I'm going to talk about why I really started to hate featured snippets. I'm going to talk a little bit about what they are and my journey of trying to win them. I'm then going to go into some existing studies that are out there on their impact on organic traffic and talk about why those inspired me to conduct my own study. And I'm going to show the findings of my study to you today. And at the very end, I'm going to give you some actions that you can take away with you to implement some of these findings. So first thing, what is a featured snippet? For those of you that don't know, it is this little box that appears at the top of the search query page when you ask a question in Google. So for this example, why do cats love catnip? It's because it stimulates their pheromones and it leaves them with an overwhelming sense of euphoria and happiness. If we wanted to get a bit meta about this, we could ask Google, what is a featured snippet? According to Google, a featured snippet is this answer that appears when you ask a question in Google sometimes. It's scraped from the web page in the box. It includes the page title and also a URL to the page. But in a bigger question, why does everyone love these things so much? What's so great about featured snippets? Again, we can ask Google. Why do people like featured snippets? The obvious answer is that it puts you right at the top of the search engine's results page, so position 0, and that is good for a lot of different reasons. The other thing is it's great for users. It gives them a very quick answer to their query, so users like these as well. And the other thing Google tells us is it's good brand exposure, so it helps increase your brand awareness. So back to my journey, my first attempt at trying to win featured snippets. This time I took a bit of a best practice approach. I had done all of my research, so one of the first things I did, I went into Stat, which is my rank tracking tool of choice, but there's plenty of others, and they have this great SERP features tab, and what I did is I grabbed a list of keywords that my client was ranking for that had featured snippets on them. I marked whether we owned or didn't own the featured snippet. For those we didn't own, I made a recommendation based on each one and how I thought they could win them. These were things like include the keyword in the heading if you don't already. So for example, this keyword, how to build a blanket fort, is owned by Pretty Providence. If I were to work at BuzzFeed, I don't, but they rank number 3 for this query. If I thought that maybe we want to try and win this featured snippet, I could look and see we don't have that keyword in our headline. We could add it in. Maybe you'd win a featured snippet that way. The other thing I had read is that there's certain forms that Google prefers featured snippets to be in depending on the type of query. So for how queries, like how to and how to catch a leprechaun, Google prefers the list format. So this is owned by Wiki right now, but if Martha Stewart wanted to try and win this featured snippet and she's ranking number 5 down here, I would look over at the page and see all of this content is locked behind slides. So I'd make a recommendation, pull that out, put it in a list on the page, maybe then you can win that featured snippet. For how much type queries, Google prefers a table, according to what I had read online. And so College Board has an example of this here. They have this table featured snippet for how much does college tuition cost. If you go onto their website, you can see it right there. So I package all this up, I deliver it, and I am convinced that this is going to be my masterpiece. Now, you probably have 2 questions on your mind right now. First, is this just a talk about how to win featured snippets? No, that is not what's happening. This is just a story. The next question that you probably have is, did any of these tactics work? And I can't answer that question for you because my slide isn't clicking, but because Google updated about a week after I did all of this and took all the featured snippets off of these queries. So I don't know. But it's OK. I learned here Google was the enemy. But I got another opportunity to do this. A different client of ours came about a week later and asked, can you try and win us featured snippets? I was the budding featured snippet master at Distilled, so obvious choice to do this. And this time I decided, you know what, I'm going to one-up Google. And I took a more competitor analysis approach this time. I looked at the current featured snippet owner and decided, what were they doing better that we weren't doing? Screw best practice, maybe that they were looking at different things that we hadn't considered. So I looked at stuff like, were they answering the query better than us? Was it just better satisfying the user intent? I looked at what content they were using, or what format they were using. Yeah, so maybe they were answering price queries with paragraphs, and Google seemed to prefer it in this instance. And other things like, were they putting headings where we weren't? Were they flagging up the content that was targeting a featured snippet better than us, making it easier for Google to scrape that out of their page? I was taking quite a long time on this because I really wanted to be my masterpiece, and I had one more keyword left. And with this final keyword, I took a pretty lazy approach, and I did the oldest SEO hat and trick in the book. And I just copied and pasted the heading of the current featured snippet owner and recommended my client use that one instead. That was the one that worked. After about 35 hours of researching featured snippets, I spent about 10 seconds on this one, and I was successful. So I had a new conclusion at this point about featured snippets. Featured snippets are bullshit. And so there's a lot of different reasons to think this, right? The first is, what is not to like about featured snippets? Featured snippets steal clicks. That's the first thing. Just like every other SERP feature, there's a lot of buzz lately about SERP features taking clicks away. Featured snippets are no different. So there's a study from Ahrefs out there. They took a bunch of clickstream data across a very large set of keywords, and this is two of their key findings that they show. First, they show that featured snippets are reducing click-through rates. So for a query that doesn't have a featured snippet, about 26% of the clicks are going to the first URL. For a query with a featured snippet, that drops to 19.6%. Now, if you're ranking first and you have the featured snippet, that's great. But for everyone else on that SERP page, that's not so good. The other thing is they're also reducing the number of no-click searches. So searches without a featured snippet, 25.8% aren't getting a click. That's compared to 29.8% for those with a featured snippet. The next is that featured snippets create confirmation bias. Now, to illustrate what I'm trying to say here, when I was 8 years old, I really wanted a bearded dragon, and I was trying to convince my parents that this was a really good idea. And they were telling me, no, you're probably going to not take care of it, you're only 8. And so say that I could ask Google at that time, I could ask a question like this: are reptiles good pets? And Google would tell me, yes, they're great pets, they're docile, friendly, low maintenance. Mom, Dad, you should definitely get me a bearded dragon. But my parents could have rebutted me and asked a similar but differently phrased question in Google and asked, are reptiles bad pets? And it would have told them yes, just like every other pet, they're prone to neglection. And I did get a bearded dragon. I didn't take care of it. My parents did, so this one was probably the correct answer. The other reason not to like featured snippets is that they're really unsophisticated. Again, going back to my example of how I was able to win a featured snippet just by copying and pasting that heading, there's other examples all over the web of this. Mother's Day was somewhat recently in the US. I'm American, and say that I asked a rather unimaginative question to try and get a message for my flowers for my mom. And I asked Mother's Day messages for your sister or your friend. Okay, so clearly these aren't being vetted that well for the best content. A more extreme example of this, I think everyone has a favorite method that they swear by to get rid of hiccups. Mine is to plug my ears and nose at the same time, hold my breath for 10 seconds, and just hope that they go away. Google, though, says to have an orgasm, or better yet, get a rectal massage. So, not really high, these are really easily manipulated. So at this point, I decide I'm gonna do something really controversial. I'm gonna prove not only are featured snippets problematic for all these reasons, they don't even help your organic traffic that much anyways. They're completely overrated, and we're wasting all our time being obsessed with these things. So the first thing I do with this is I decide to look at what existing studies are out there. Maybe someone beat me to the punch. And I see this study from HubSpot saying that featured snippets increase their click-through rate by 114%. Then I also saw this study from Search Engine Land that said featured snippets increase their organic sessions by 516%. But luckily, it's okay, because all of these studies sucked. Now, I'm sorry if anyone's in the audience. I think one of them is here today. We can talk after. But here's a couple of the issues that I have with this study. The first was that they were using misleading wording. So going to the example of HubSpot, they were reporting relative increase instead of absolute increases in percentages. So click-through rate increases by 114%. I can say that I discovered that people that don't eat ice cream have a 0.1% chance of committing murder. People that do eat ice cream have a 0.2% chance. And therefore, eating ice cream increases your likelihood of committing murder by 100%. Misleading. The next thing is that I was using a misleading headline. So the way that this study in HubSpot, it made it sound like they had a bunch of pages that didn't have a featured snippet, they won a featured snippet, and then they saw an increase, but that's actually not what happened. This study was comparing pages that had a featured snippet with pages that didn't have a featured snippet, and there's a lot of different reasons why a page that owns a featured snippet is going to be performing better in organic search. It's probably optimized better already. So this is the chart that they show you, and this figure is actually 20% different that you see over here. The next problem that I have with all these studies was that they didn't have a very good controlled experiment environment. So for search engine land, HubSpot, they included low volume keywords, which are very susceptible to distorted click-through rates. So if you have 2 impressions, 1 click, 50% click-through rate, not really the best example. With search engine land, they show you this graph. So what they said is they had this blog post, they made a bunch of improvements to it in February, then they didn't touch it. In June, they won a featured snippet, and they saw a 516% increase in sessions. Now, if you look at this graph, though, you can see that prior to June, this page was increasing in performance anyway, so you can't just attribute that to a featured snippet. The next graph that they show you is the average position of this page over the time period. And we can see also, not only did they win a featured snippet, but their rankings were improving across this entire time. And also, this page never ranked above position 4. If you're going from position 4 or below and winning a featured snippet, you're going to see a much bigger increase than if you were ranking in position in 1 or 2 to begin with. There's really just one important thing that I'm trying to get at here, though, because this meant that I was back in business. So I decided to create my own study. And this was my research method. My hypothesis was that, of course, owning a featured snippet does not significantly impact your click-through rate. I used 2 different data sources for this. The first data source I used was Stat, which I mentioned earlier as my rank tracking tool of choice. And from Stat, I got across a range of different clients of ours that distilled from various different industries, got a bunch of keywords. I found keywords where a client had instances of owning and not owning the featured snippet. And I reported day by day if they rank, what the rank was on that day. I used base rank, so it wasn't distorted by SERP features. And I also marked, did they own it, did they not own the featured snippet? I put this together with Google Search Console data, so I could get the click-through rate on that day. I only included keywords, instances that they had 60 impressions or more on that day. This left me with 3,834 data points. I want you to all forget everything that you've ever been told about featured snippets, because this is what I found. Featured snippets improve your organic click-through rate at every single position. So I failed. And let me walk you through what this graph is showing you. So on the x-axis, we have the base rank. On the y-axis, we have the click-through rate. This is every single different day for all these different keywords. Red bubbles mean that they didn't own the featured snippet. Blue bubbles mean that they did. Blue bubbles are always above the red bubbles in this chart. So it definitely helps. The next thing I see in this chart is that position 4 and up are more likely to own a featured snippet. Now, none of these results were necessarily surprising to me, but I pointed this out for a specific reason. Going back to the HubSpot study, they said that 18% of their pages ranking in position 1 had a featured snippet. This was compared to 26% for those ranking in position 5. And based off this finding, they claimed for the top 5 results, backlinks and other authority signals matter much less for owning a featured snippet. That's not what I found to be true. Rankings do still matter if you want to win a featured snippet. To hammer this home, the average rank in my study of a page that had a featured snippet was 2.1. Those that didn't was 3.3. The last thing I find in this chart that, again, isn't very surprising, but it's good to confirm, pages ranking below position 10 are very unlikely to own featured snippets. I didn't see any instances of this. The next thing I wanted to explore with my research was this claim that they saw a 20% increase in click-through rate when they owned a featured snippet. And so what I did for that is I got the difference for every single position in my study of the average click-through rate when they owned a featured snippet of all of those that owned it, and the average click-through rate if they didn't, and plotted the difference in a chart. So this is what I saw. So the highest increase I saw was at position 6, where they saw about a 7% increase in click-through rate, or a difference in click-through rate for those that own a featured snippet. Again, that's really good, and it's definitely reason to be trying to win featured snippets, but it's not 20%. To see if I could get closer to that 20% number, I filtered this to just one client to make it more similar to the HubSpot study. And even when I did that, I got up to 10% for those in position 5, but again, wasn't 20%. I'm trying to disprove these studies, but really there's just one conclusion here. They were right, and featured snippets do work. But, okay, I still hate featured snippets for the reasons that I outlined before. They're stealing clicks, they lead to confirmation bias, and they just have stupid answers sometimes. It's become a running joke at Distilled now that I don't like featured snippets, so every time someone finds a stupid one, they tag me in it. So it's really fun. If you see any on Twitter, feel free to send them to me. My favorite one recently was, how many ships are in the US Navy? And it says, at least 13, which is just fun. So, but as I promised, Monday morning actions for you because featured snippets do work. This is some of the stuff I've learned from this study and trying to win them for my clients. The first thing you're going to want to do if you're trying to win a featured snippet is find keywords that you rank for that have a featured snippet on them and make a targeted list for those that you don't own. I use Stat for this, but you can also use Conductor, as was mentioned earlier. You can use Moz, SEMrush. There's plenty of different tools that you can do this with. I would avoid keywords that have a commercial intent to them, especially if you're targeting them with commercial pages. Back to my very first example, when Google took all those featured snippets away, that was because these were actually transactional queries that Google decided actually a featured snippet wasn't very well suited to this query. I also saw this in my study when I saw for those types of keywords they were getting shopped out for Google shopping results and other more transactional SERP features. I'd flag where you're ranking higher than the current owner. So this goes back to that finding that the higher you rank, the more likely you are to own a featured snippet. If you're ranking higher than the person currently owning it, then that's an indication it's more something that you need to improve with your content than something that you need to improve with your rankings, so you have a better chance of being able to win those. I'd look for low-hanging fruit. And by this I mean, like, I was able to just copy and paste that heading. These aren't very sophisticated, so don't spend a ton of time trying to come up with a really genius idea like I did to win a featured snippet. It's not that complicated, especially when you rank higher. The other point that I have is joining 2 points together with however. So Google is catching on to the confirmation bias thing, and a couple of my colleagues at Distilled recently had an experience where they were able to win a featured snippet because they noticed that the current owner, Google was pulling 2 different parts of their web page together with an ellipses. And this was where they was presenting 2 different arguments. So they had one side of the argument, ... the other side. What my colleagues did is they just did that work for Google. They put those 2 answers together on their client's page, and they won the featured snippet. So that was kind of cool and just maybe something that might help you. And this sounds simple, but this has helped a lot of our clients. Very often people have very well-performing pages that just aren't targeting featured snippets, but are ranking for queries that have them. So if that's you, make sure that you add some content to target those featured snippets. We've seen upwards of 20% uplift in organic sessions when people have done this. And finally, I'd reformat your content to match that of the current owner. So that's things like turning paragraphs into lists, lists into tables, etc. I see some people taking photos, so I'll leave the slide up. Also, I am going to share all of these on SlideShare after. So we can do that. And then I have one final thing to share with you, and I realized last night I put the wrong link on this. So look on my SlideShare later, and I'll tweet the actual right one. But this is a pretty cool tool that just recently someone at Distilled shared with me. So this is a demo, and the idea behind this is that Google uses natural language processing to decide which part of your page answers the query that people are looking for. So what you can do with this is you input all of the content on your page into one part, and then you put the questions that you're trying to target, and then it will process that and tell you, was it able to find that answer on your web page? So that's one way you can definitely verify that Google's able to understand that you're answering that question. I started this talk today by saying that I really wanted to become the featured snippet master at Distilled and used a corny Darth Vader reference. And I said that I didn't feel like I was successful, but I am standing here today talking to all of you about it, so I'd say that I won. Thank you.